You're watching RT International live from Moscow with me, Nadira Tudor. Welcome to the programme. Now, we are discussing today the initial findings that we've been watching from the Dutch-led criminal investigation looking into the downing of the MH17 back in July 2014. And with me in the studio is Ilya Petrenko to discuss the findings. They happened only, a few minutes ago, and now it started around 2 o'clock this afternoon, Moscow time. And certainly it looked a bit damning from a Russian perspective. They did say that it was the pro-Russians that were responsible. They've talked about routes of how the missile, which they've said was definitely the way that the MH17 plane came down, how it went from Russia to Ukraine. Let's discuss that a bit further.
Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the evidence that the joint investigation team was using to make those conclusions. The things that were presented at the press conference were photos and videos mainly connected from witnesses and also social media, phone conversations that were tapped into exchange of messages. Also, they talked about some kind of radar and satellite images provided there. But during the press conference, we haven't seen any of those things. So if you look at the timeline of events, what we've just heard was that this 9M38 Buk missile system, Russian-made, was transported into Ukraine through the border, of course, and then first led into Donetsk. And that's when we see a lot of photo evidence that was put forward by the JIT. After Donetsk, where some kind of manipulations were carried out with that system, the Buk missiles were transported to the area, which is east of Donetsk, about several dozen kilometers. We've heard many times the name of the town Snezhnaya, and the JIT are concluding that there was a small farmland area near the village of Pervomayskaya. They showed one picture of burned farmland there. They said that the witnesses there saw a smoke trail. They plowed the land that day, and they saw burned fields there, and that's how they concluded that this specific spot there was where the Buk missile was launched from. Although we understand that this place was a scene of heavy fighting between anti-government forces and also the Kiev-controlled army, and there were many fields burned there. There are also other questions that have to be asked. We haven't seen any sound bites. I understand that, of course, in this kind of situation, it wouldn't be ethical to reveal the identities of the people, but
they were reliant, weren't they, on a lot of witness accounts. I mean, that's what we saw, and you're absolutely right. A lot of intercepted phone conversations, and I know that a couple of days ago, one of the questions were, where was the other, you mentioned it before, the other radar data from the south and the west of the country, US evidence that was questioned.
We didn't see any satellite
And we
images.
didn't see any of that, did we, within that presentation in the last hour?
Well, I was looking to hear some sound bites still, looking for them, because they could have changed the voice. They could have, I don't know, maybe just covered the faces of people. But the only actual conversations we heard were conversations on the phone or message exchanges that were voiced. Allegedly, there were some kind of separatists, anti-government fighters talking there. The question is also where these conversations came from. Did they come from the Ukrainian side? At the same time, we clearly understand that in this kind of situation, that that part of the investigative team is clearly taking sides here.
Well, so we will discuss this, I'm sure, in over the next few minutes. But what we're going to do is have a quick look at see what the Dutch investigators, the weapon that shot down the plane was a certain type of Russian-made Buk missile. That's what they've just said. Its manufacturer, Almaz Ante, recreated the crash to confirm this, but its findings contradict these claims, as RT's Murad Gaziev explains.
A similar plane and the same type of missile, which Dutch investigators say felled MH17. And right off the bat, we've got a number of problems. For a start, the shrapnel damage doesn't match. The suspect missile has butterfly-shaped projectiles, which unsurprisingly leave butterfly-shaped holes. the damage done to MH17 is inconsistent with that. The holes are round, they're jagged. You don't exactly see butterflies, do you? So how could they have been made by the same missile? Well, here the Dutch investigators named their type of missile based on just 3 fragments found on the site. And just so you understand, each missile carries thousands of them. Almazantay says the first fragment is much smaller than you would find in a Buk missile. Another simply disappeared from the investigation with no reason given. The third fragment, shaped like a butterfly, was found, we don't know where. Dutch investigators don't say, contrary to the investigation's own rules.
In early 2015, the Dutch Safety Board reached out to us for a technical consultation on the matter. We provided them with all the requested information, including things that were classified at the time. But considering the importance of the incident, the decision was taken to declassify them and to provide them to the Dutch side. I can only add that during the early stages, Dutch specialists often use largely unverified information. Quoting Wikipedia on technical details, I'm being quite serious.
When Almazantay blew up their missile, almost every single piece of shrapnel penetrated the plane, and most went right through out the other side. With MH17, however, you've got these mysterious scratches, skid marks. So the shrapnel hit MH17, but didn't go through. A lot of it means the missile came from a different direction than the one cited by the Dutch. It didn't come in head-on, parallel to MH17, like Dutch investigators say, because then the damage would have been much worse. The shrapnel would have gone right through the jet. Instead, Almazantay have offered an alternative version, which would explain the skid marks, the scratches. The missile must have come in at an angle. The shrapnel went sideways, and some of it skidded off. Almazantay say the Dutch have ignored the results of their probe. Maybe they had their reasons, but the question is, do they really have all the evidence they need to complete a picture of what happened on that fateful day?
Live now to Joaquin Flores, who is an editor-in-chief at Fort Russ News. Thanks for joining us here on the programme, Joaquin. What do you make of the investigation results? Are you surprised by them?
We are not at all surprised by the results. Of course, the very problem with the JIT, the Joint Investigative Team, from its genesis, was that it was put together by NATO as a result of a failure to actually create a truly independent inquiry team, which was rejected at the level of the UN Security Council once it became clear that the point of any investigation was going to be to determine how it was that the Russian Federation was responsible, instead of looking at the first question, who did it? So that was the problem from the very start. It was a geopolitically motivated investigation, and it was flawed. Of course, you have a conflict of interest here right at the start, because the Netherlands, of course, is a NATO country, and NATO has been, of course, actively involved in this conflict on the side of the Ukrainian government. So we're not at all surprised by the results, and it's a deficient, politically deficient, and by process, it's also defective.
Joaquin, this is meant to be an independent report, isn't it? And surely you would hope that politics stayed out of the report. Do you think this is the case?
It can't be the case, and because, of course, we know that what happened was there had been an original proposal to create a truly independent inquiry into this. And once it became clear that it was going to be politicized and had the intention of predetermining guilt of the Russian Federation, which is not a party to the conflict, then this was a critical flaw. And the real victims here are the families of the deceased in this tragedy, because for over 2 years they have been led along a Byzantine, meandering route being misinformed by their own governments and through Western media, which has unfortunately gone far ahead and beyond of the investigation itself. And
Joaquin, you mentioned
talking points.
Joaquin, you mentioned that the real victims are the families, of course, but from what we've seen in the last hour and a half, it was a very thorough investigation. That's what the public and those victims' families will see. They have put, in their eyes, I would imagine, a good case forward. But there are questions, obviously, from the Russian perspective as well. Now, I'm sure that those victims' families just want answers. Are they getting those answers?
No, the victims' families are not getting these answers. We have to keep in mind that all of the objective data for this investigation had been collected well over a year ago, and the conclusive reports necessary to make this report have been available, have been ready and prepared for up to a year. Why at this time the report was released, of course, is a matter of speculation. But what is clear is that this report has been politicized, and the feelings and the trauma and the pain of the victims' families are being manipulated into a larger geopolitical theatrical play. And this is what, of course, is probably the biggest crime at this time, is that there will be no resolution, there will be no closure for the families so long as the event, the tragedy, is investigated in this way.
Joaquin, when you watched this press conference, did you expect further evidence? Did you feel that enough evidence in terms of eyewitnesses, other elements were put forward, and did you feel that you had a thorough investigation there that was put forward in the findings?
No, because the investigation from its start began with the premise that it was going to look only at certain types of evidence at the exclusion of others. It was a politically motivated and charged investigation from the start. This can't be called an investigation in the way that people commonly understand investigations. You had the prosecution was the investigating committee and engaged in this as a theatrical play. The families have been, of course, misled and their feelings have been manipulated, but the general public also needs to look at this and to understand how this came to be. Why would the investigation not look at, for example, the air traffic control matters relating to the Ukrainian Air Traffic Control Authority? Why was this plane brought over a war zone? If we're going to look at the question of negligence or criminal negligence, we can't, of course, look at an active war zone where you have the fog of war, you have, of course, the expectation that planes flying overhead would be involved in the war. Who in their right mind, what air traffic control authority in their right mind would have given the green light to create an air path route over a war zone? And why the investigation has skirted around this, why the public discourse in Western media has not been focused on that critical question, you know, it sort of becomes a moot point in a war zone to a certain extent. Which of the warring parties pushed the button? And of course, from an empirical perspective, what no one disagrees with is that it was Ukrainians who took this plane down, not the Ukrainian government, but you have a civil war between warring Ukrainian factions, and this happened within Ukraine. So you would have had the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian air traffic control were the legally responsible party in making sure that you don't take a civilian flight over a war zone.
Joaquin Flores, Editor-in-Chief at Fort Russ News. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Ukrainian officials have provided their own version of the crash, saying that a Russian missile launcher was in the area at the time. They backed up this claim, citing photos from social media, but have not released any radar data to confirm this. Kiev claims that its civilian radars were under maintenance, while its military ones were simply not working. The mystery behind the MH17 crash has prompted many to launch their own investigations. Among them is a group named Bellingcat, which went far beyond the Dutch investigators and already claimed the weapon that brought the plane down came from Russia. You might think such investigations require a certain level of experience, but it's not always the case.
Elliot Higgins, who runs the website Bellingcat, is a laid-off admin worker who made a name for himself by analysing weapons used in the Syrian conflict.
Never been to Syria, doesn't speak a word of Arabic, and he conducts his profound research from the comfort of his armchair in his home.
Higgins himself admits he has no experience in the field.
Before the Arab Spring, I knew no more about weapons than the average Xbox owner. I had no knowledge beyond what I'd learned from Arnold Schwarzenegger and Rambo.
His tools of choice for uncovering global conspiracies: YouTube and Google Earth.
Billboards in the area kind of looked the same, but it wasn't really, you know, this isn't enough to say this is definitely the same area. There was, you could see the path and the grass, but again, it's not a great match. So we know the Russians lied.
And the media loves him.
Elliot Higgins, a
British blogger who's
been analysing the pictures of the wreckage.
Thank you for joining the program.
But some are questioning his methods, like the developer of the photo analysis program which Bellingcat used to claim Moscow faked satellite images. And image forensics experts aren't fans either.
What Bellingcat is doing is nothing more than reading tea leaves. Error level analysis is a method used by hobbyists.
But fellow obsessives are ecstatic about scrutinizing Bellingcat's analysis. Bloggers claim he's showing photos of two different Buk missile systems in an attempt to prove the weapon came from Russia. They say the one pictured in Russia is a newer model because it features a recent modification. As for the claim that no Ukrainian Buks were in the area at the time of the crash, well, fellow bloggers dug up screenshots from Ukrainian TV, apparently showing a Buk missile system, complete with radar, in the area just a few days before the tragedy.
RT's Paul Islier asked the investigators about whether they took Russia's evidence into account.
Why doesn't your report take into account the results of the full-scale simulation that was carried out by the manufacturer of the Buk missile system? Don't you think that they could add some important information to the investigation?
The material you're mentioning, the arena tests that were performed, we received that material from the Russian Federation only very recently. It was about 2 weeks ago. And we did investigate that material, and we're using it in the investigation. We'll certainly add it to the file. The only thing we said today is that the quantity of other evidence we have compared with material that we already had doesn't lead us to different conclusions, because the overwhelming quantity of material could lead to this conclusion.